the first civilization that used democracy. Actually, it was quite a mixture of different folks. Why Putin decided to attack Ukraine? Hi, I'm Markku Wilenius, and this time we're talking about why actually Putin invaded Ukraine. Again, as a futurist, we need to be looking this at a certain perspective where past, present and future comes together. Now, in case why Putin decided to attack Ukraine, we have to go back to more than 2,000 years. Because then we have the first civilization that used democracy. And we all know what that was. That was Athens. Athens was a birthplace of democracy. Athens and the Greece was an eastern corner of Europe. It was the point where actually the east and the west meets in the southern part of the Europe, and where the western Rome and the eastern Rome thousands of years ago were having the borderlines. Now there is strong connection to area of Ukraine and Greece. A lot of Greek merchants and the others actually migrated up to Ukraine, and Ukraine became a region where there was a lot of Greeks, a lot of Jews. Actually, it was quite a mixture of different folks, and also where the first real civilization, long before Russia, was initiated. Now, what happened was that there was this influence, and that created then the fact that it is Ukraine, as it was then and it is now, that has the most fertile agricultural land in the whole world. We know that ultimately we people are dependent on the food. And Ukraine, already in those days, started to become this type of nexus where agricultural products were produced and a lot of trading around that took place. Now, when Ukraine became independent in 1917 after the Russian Revolution, it turned out to be very short-lived, because only a couple of years later the new communist regime took over Ukraine. The independence was left behind, and instead came the terror of first Lenin and then Stalin. This terror was significant because it was particularly in that region of Ukraine where the most tradable economic assets were for the whole of the Soviet Union. So it was crucially important. And we know that back in the 1930s, millions of Ukrainians, intelligentsia, farmers, what have you, they were killed because of the terror of the Stalin. And then came the Second World War, where again the Ukrainian soil was the one that was battled, this time the battlefields between Germany and Russia. Now, after the disintegration of the Soviet Union to Russia, Ukraine got the independence. And this independence is now about 30 years old. And this has been now the time to build up back the democracy. And as I said, the democracy itself has sort of a long roots there in Ukraine. Even if it was a bit slow movement towards democracy after the independence, it was moving forward. And there is several occasions in this 30 years time when this lean towards the democracy was disrupted, and it was mostly disrupted by influences that came from Russia. Because for Putin, it became very apparent that if Ukraine is westernized, that is the heaviest blow thinkable for Russia. Because so much was actually dependent on this relationship between Ukraine and Russia. And of course there is a third party, Belarus, but Belarus has been never leaning to the West, not because the people would not like that to be, but because of another tyrant, which is Alexander Lukashenko, that has been taking care of the direction of that country ever since the 1990s. There is, however, been all the time very significant move towards the democracy. It's not just towards the West, it's a lean towards the democracy, but it's been hard because there were also a lot of bad Soviet Union practices with a lot of hidden corruption and so forth. So it's been a slow progress. But in that slow progress, there has been definitely a direction to that. Of course, Eastern Ukrainians being more leaning towards Russia, while Westerns more towards the West. But all in all, the society which is willing to move towards the West. It looks as if what happened when Putin decided to take the Ukraine back to Mother Russia, that was because he saw that if he gets Ukraine loose to the West, it is not only that it's gonna mean less collaboration with Russia, but also that it would show that the Russian system, that has never been a true democracy, even if they have some other democratic institutions, but never been that it would show very backward compared to its neighbor, Ukraine. And of course, being in the position of a dictator, Putin never liked to have that. In addition to which, he also had his close companions, Alexander Borchnikov and Nikolai Partulchev. Both of these guys that were really much seeing the same thing as Putin, even stronger than he did. And with that reasoning, they really saw that if they want to crush the Ukrainian democracy, they better do it now before it's too late. Ukraine starts to become too much tied to the West. This is why this NATO membership became so important, not just because of the NATO, but because it would signify the tight relationship to the Western countries. And that was not something that Putin was ready to allow to happen. So he saw that this was almost as if it is his final chance to change something and to take, as I said, the Ukraine back to Mother Russia. If you look at the flag of Ukraine, you will see the emblem there, which is this trident, which is kind of a three-arrow thing that in the Greek mythology was belonging to the god Poseidon. And Poseidon was the god of the seas, a very strong and very, very forward-looking god of the Greek palette of gods. Now, it's not a happenstance that there is this figure of Poseidon there, because essentially, ever since the trade began from Ukraine to other parts of the world, it has of course happened through the seas. So the sea connection has been crucially important for Ukraine to be a part of the world and play its role there and get the money flowing into the country. And so it has been. But even more importantly, there is a very old tradition of leaning towards what Greeks at the time created. named their democracy. So this very old but significant connection is something that has been now almost like put into the very other light now that they are fighting for their independence and for their country. Because not only is there a stake of the independence itself, what is really at stake is the state of the democracy. And this is what these people in Ukraine seriously are leaning towards, and they would not want to get away from that. There is nothing that implies that they would like to have this type of formal democracy like in Russia, which in fact runs as an authoritarian state. If we think about the significance of this kind of a narrative, this how we have become into this point of a time that we are witnessing something that where Putin invades Ukraine, tries to take it back to them at any price, really at any price. We need to think about this as an age-old battle that has been going on in that part of the world. But what I believe and what I predict very much is that this time there is going to be a real separation that happens between the Russia and Ukraine. But of course, there are still people, and a lot of people that have their connections to the both countries, and that would not be given away. That's always going to be there. But we need to understand that the world is going to a very different direction right now. We are going towards more decentralization. There is a more and more autonomy that we want to have over our things as a culture, not just as a country, but as a culture. And if we have this old tradition that we want to continue, and that if we feel it is a part of our DNA, we finally, if we persist, we're gonna get there. And this is exactly what is going to happen with Ukraine, because it actually is reinforcing. It is reinforcing the Ukrainian idea of the democracy. This whole war, as tough and rough as it is. The implication for the future is the following. We are come to an age where through the decentralization of power, through digital means, huge amount of information that is available in the world, we are a very different way of educated. What do we as human beings want from our society? And that cannot be any more dictated, coming from above. It can be postponed by giving propaganda and all other kinds of misinformation, but eventually people will win. This was not formally the case because most of the people were really left to be quite ignorant, but not in our world where there is abundance of information and possibilities for communication. So our world has fundamentally shifted to the direction that it supports this type of idea of the autonomy and the idea of the democracy. And once people commit to that, then I believe in this case and in any other case, the people will ultimately win. Subscribe to my channel and look at other stuff that you can learn from the future.